Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. In the last episode, we covered a little introduction to Season 1, which is going to deal with layouts. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. You can see here we have the activity main XML file open in our design view, and there's a whole lot going on around here. Right? So on the right side here, there's the attributes pane, which will show you all the attributes for whatever is selected. At the moment we have the root view being selected, but if we were to select on this text view, now there's a bunch of different attributes that we can obviously customize and change. They'll be reflected in the layout. On the left here we have palette, which seems to have all of our UI elements broken down into categories, and then you can just very easily take one, drag it on the screen, and now you have another text view on there. We're going to remove that for now because I think this is worth talking about. You notice the text view in the middle of the screen, but when you click on it, it has all of these little squiggly lines on it. And so those are actually constraints because this text view sits inside of a constraint layout. If we quickly switch over to the text view, you can see that there's the constraint layout, and then there is a text view as a child of this view group. You could see in here there are a whole bunch of also attributes listed here that match up to the attributes that are here. So you'll see things layout width, layout height, different constraints all set to parent, and then a text attribute. If we look in here, layout width, layout height, different constraints all set to parent, and a text attribute. So if we were to change this here to text, and we flip over here, now our text attribute now says text. But now if we say texting, and we go over here, this attribute has been updated. So you can see how both of these views work together with one another. And hopefully you can imagine why, once you get in the groove of things, being able to modify the different attributes in the textual representation is just a bit cleaner, a bit faster than trying to like hunt through, well, first of all, clicking on your element, then hunting through which attributes you're looking for, changing them or setting them or removing them, etc. But to get back to these little guys here, these are constraints. So I think it might be easiest to take a look at what the constraints mean in the text layout because it's just easier to read. So they all start the same, right? They all say layout underscore constraint, and then it starts to differ. So the idea here in the constraint layout is that you can constrain any child of the constraint layout can set or constrain any of its edges or any of its corners. Sorry, not corners, I guess. Edges would probably be the better one, right? So we can either reference the view's bottom, the view's left, the view's right, the view's top. And I'm actually very surprised that they did this. We're going to change that right now to constraint left to start and end to right. So these are actually the four that you should visualize or think about when we're talking about views. Right? A view has a bottom, it has a start, it has an end, and it has a top. And if we were to zoom in over here, hopefully you can imagine that this right here is the view's top, this is the view's end, because everything works left to right, at least we're going to be dealing with it left to right. This is the view's bottom, and this is the view's left, right? So it kind of gives you a way to describe the bounding box of the view. And now, because we have all of these views, because we have all of these constraints set to the parent, that means that we're going to take a look at the top of the view and set it to the top of the parent. So if you could imagine the view box for the parent as well being the entire screen, you can see, hopefully, why these squiggly lines are the way they are. So that's saying that the top of the view is constrained to the top of the parent, the end to the end, the bottom to the bottom, and the start to the start. So when we end up doing something like that, we get a view that's centered not only vertically or horizontally. So if we were to, let's say, remove bottom to bottom of, now it's all the way at the top. So we still have it centered horizontally because it's still constrained to the start of the view and the end, start of the parent and the end of the parent, but there is nothing pulling it down anymore, only something to pull it up. Let's see here if we were to get rid of the end, right? So hopefully you can get the idea here that how these constraints are working to move the view around the screen, have it tethered to something, or offset from something, etc. It allows it to be quite flexible. And so for that reason, among others, the constraint layout is going to be the parent that we care most about and the parent that we end up using. It also kind of, once you get used to it, it's just intuitive, right? It just is the way that you would imagine how you want to set that view up, right? You want this view to be in the top left corner of the screen. Okay, well, you know, how would you actually make that happen other than setting coordinates 0, 0, you know, which is a very hard-coded approach. You know, how would you actually represent that in code with some logical thought process to it? And so once you kind of understand how constraints work, it's actually pretty intuitive, pretty easy, and you can start chaining things together. So if we add another text view to the screen, but instead of start to start of, we're going to do constraint bottom to constraint end to end of, and now that's going to push this one all the way to the other side of the screen, right? So it's still constrained vertically to the top and horizontally to the end. So now they're sitting in opposite corners from one another. Parent is a pretty unique, I guess, item or special ID that the IDE understands that when you type the word parent, it's referring to the parent of this individual view. If we wanted to now have these two in relation to one another, how would we do that, right? Like what? So if we wanted this one here to be constraint to the, like we wanted it to sit right underneath it, well, we can constrain the top of this thing to the bottom of this view, right? And then we can constrain the start of this thing to the start of either, in this case we can do it to the start of the parent or to the start of this view, which would completely line it up, right, with the view above it. But we don't have a way of referencing at the moment either of these text views, especially in relation to one another. Let's say we're going to go ahead and give this text view an ID. And now an ID is a universal, well, not universal. It is a file-specific way to reference a particular view. If we were to do this, if we were to set the same ID on two views in the same file, we get an error. And it tells you here, duplicate ID. And there's already one defined in this layout. Because if we were to try to reference from code or from another view, title, text view at the moment, the system wouldn't know which one you're referring to. I'm actually going to change this to subtitle text view because in a minute we're going to have this laid out in like a title, subtitle kind of view. So let's keep this guy in the top left, but let's move this one here. I'm going to flip over to the design really quickly because I kind of want to go through this with you guys as well, so bear with me here. But what I would actually like to do is, okay, remove this. Seems like you can remove these constraints here on the view itself, which is, oh, is it not letting me? Okay, there we go. So this view no longer has constraints, so I can just move it around wherever I want. But that's not really scalable. So what I would like to do is I would like to set this to the parent, and I would like to set the top of this to the bottom of this. So it kind of snaps together now. And if you see here, constraint top to bottom of title text view, constraint start to start of parent. Again, this is mimicked here, but this is now, there's now an understanding that this subtitle text view, the one underneath, is now constrained to this other view. And now what happens to that is, or the reason that is powerful is once this view moves, I'm just going to do something real quick, don't worry about it though. We put margin top 50 dp. So that pushes this view from the top of wherever it's constrained by 50 pixels. Because this second view is constrained to this the first view, this now moves in tandem with it. If this one was just set up, hard-coded to be at position 0, 50 or something like that, it would have still stayed there, and this other view would have moved without the subtitle view reacting. So you can kind of now start to build your UI in relation to one another. So you can kind of think of certain views as anchor points, or certain views as like building blocks for your other views. And in this case, we're relying on the initial view that we're looking at, or the first view in the layout file, to kind of drive the rest, or in this case, the other view that we have. So I'm going to remove that real quick, and we called them title and subtitle, so why don't we do that as well? So in here, it starts to look somewhat like a UI, right? So this is good so far. If you remember what it was supposed to look like, I'll throw it on screen now. We're kind of getting there, but we need to do something about this. This is completely in the upmost top left corner of the screen, and that doesn't really look too good. So you might have got a little snippet of what I was going to do, but there is something called margin. There are basically two ways to accomplish this if we want to push the view from the top of the screen. There's something called margin, and so we're going to reference the margin top. A pretty standard measurement is 16 dp. Or I want to also push it away from the start of the screen here, so I'm going to use the other way to do that, and I'm going to say padding start 16 dp. So if we take a look at this, and this is quite important to understand, so if we take a look at this here, if we forget about this subtitle view for a second, the view itself is where we want it to be, right? As in the word title is where we want it to be. We want it to be a little bit from the top and a little bit from the start. But see this bounding box here? The margin field or attribute actually pushes the view down, whereas the padding attribute actually makes the view larger and actually pushes the rest of this view over to the right. Because we put a margin start here of 16 dp, there is now a gap in our view of 16 dp before, in this case, because it's a text view, before the text starts. So although the text is in the correct spot, this is actually slightly less efficient, and in my opinion, just slightly, I don't know, it's just a little weird to do things this way because we're making the view larger than it has to. Don't get me wrong, padding has its place, but when you're trying to move a view around the screen, or when you're trying to separate views from one another, margin is probably the way to go. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to be padding, margin start. We're going to apply the same thing. So you can see it's still in the same spot on the screen, right? It still is, 16 from the left, 16 from the top, but you can see this bounding box is completely wrapped around the text. It's not it didn't extend all the way over here. So a subtle difference, but something most definitely worth noting. But now our subtitle needs to have the same thing. And so we could apply well, we don't want the margin top, but we could apply this same attribute here to move it over to the left. However, we could be a little bit more clever than that since we're dealing with a constraint layout. The reason that this is all the way to the left, if you remember, is because we have the constraint start to the start of the parent. And so before it looked fine because the parent, the title and the subtitle text views were both on, constrained to the start of the parent. So everything kind of lined up. But now we applied, view specific attributes on one of them, and we didn't reflect that to the other one. Well, we shouldn't because, again, they're specific to this one title text view, but we can utilize some of this information here and kind of basically have it carry over to this text view if we're clever about it. So instead of having it start to start of parent, if we said start to start of title text view, now you can see that these are once again aligned, and this is 16 dp from the parent, but we don't have to have that attribute tied to the this particular view. Hopefully this is making some sense, and you can see how this can be quite powerful and how you can kind of truly accomplish some very nice looking UIs quite simply. And just as an example here, if we were to take the margin start 16 and apply it to this one, hopefully this also now makes sense, right? So the start is aligned to the start of this view, but we push it over 16 dp. So now we get this kind of indented feel, which isn't bad at all now that I'm looking at it, but I'm going to go ahead and remove that just to keep things simple. But again, if you remember the ultimate view of what we wanted to get to with the title and subtitle, it was a little different. It doesn't, these don't really provide much depth to one another, right? They're just laying on top of one another, and it's not it's not all that glorious at the moment. It's kind of bare. Before I do this, actually, so another reason I like this is that you can oftentimes just start typing, and you can see the different attributes that exist on the particular view itself. So what I'm trying to do right now is I'm trying to set the text size here. Let's make it SP, 22 SP, and then let's set the text size here to, let's go 14 SP. SP versus DP we will get into in a later video, but know that anything for basically size of text should always end with SP, and anything that's referring to like specific dimensions or measurements other than text should be DP. Again, we'll dive deeper into that in the future. It's not the focus of this video, but you're able to kind of, there is a difference, and it's worth noting. And I think if I actually try to set this to DP, it gives me a little warning, and it says should use SP instead of DP for text sizes. So we'll take you up on that. Thank you very much. Okay, it's coming together now, but it kind of looks to be on top of one another again, like a little squished and whatnot. So we're going to just provide a little bit of that separation again. I'm going to go with a simple 4dp. All right, something small. You actually saw that view move, hopefully. And you can now even see there's a little bit of a gap here in between the actual views. Again, you can do the same thing with padding, but again, let's stay away from that for now. And then let's give this guy some color as well. I'm going to open up a file. If you, in Android Studio, double tap Shift pretty quickly, it brings up this little menu. There's a file that's called colors.xml. It exists inside your source, main, resource, values directory, and it basically just holds, you can set variables to hold specific colors that you want. Again, should just be colors that are set here, and this is how you can kind of accomplish some theming in your application. And this was a little bit of a surprise to me when I opened this file for the first time, because it looks different than how it used to. But without worrying about it too much, this is why, if you saw when we ran it that the toolbar had a specific color to it, this is where it's pulling those colors from. So let's go ahead and take purple 700. So I just copy that to my clipboard, and now text color, in order to reference an element in that colors file, you say add color slash, and you paste in whatever it is. So you can see purple 257, and those match up with these 257 here. And then the values here, the hex values, are what's actually rendering in the screen. So now you can see that title has a little bit of a purplish color to it. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing here, except we're going to just give it a little lighter feel to it. I don't know. Yeah, it's too close. Not going for beauty right now, just want to show you guys some of the attributes there. Again, all of this can be controlled in the Design tab now that it's in here. Okay, so this actually opens all of your colors that exist in your file, and otherwise there's just some other ones here that are like kind of predefined in the system, and there are a lot of them. So you can, yeah, I was gonna say you could probably even do this kind of thing if you want to get like a specific color, but you know, oops. For right now, I'm just trying to show you that there are different attributes that can be modified in different ways. So maybe if we wanted to just change the subtitle back to black, if we click on this and do that, yeah, and let's go this way, because why not? Again, text size, you can clearly see here a little drop down, and it's auto-populated with SP, and these are, I guess, a lot of the popular font or text sizes that Google pushes for. If you remember in an earlier video, I was talking about material design principles, so it's quite possible that each one of these specific measurements matches up to, you know, a similar like heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 text style if you have done any kind of like, you know, web development or anything like that. So not worrying about that too much at the moment, but yeah, there seems to be a whole lot here that you can do. But almost done here. If you remember the, let's get the whole thing on here. If you remember the little view that I wanted to get this to, we were missing a button in the bottom right. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that on screen somewhere nearby. And I'm going to constrain this here like this. It looks like, let's see, what is this? Which one does this do? 16. Oh, look at that. Margin end 16 dp. So again, these are kind of standard attributes, standard measurements to define different kinds of distances. And well, that's actually pretty clean. So by setting that, you can see here, these are the different constraints on the different sides. This is saying that, you know, create a top constraint, create a left constraint. Oh, I really don't like that it calls it left and right. It used to be left and right, and then they went to like start and end, and then they were yelling at us for using left and right in the IDE, and now they're doing left and right again. So I don't know what that's about, but anyway, you can see that this button is now, you know, appropriately fixed at the bottom of the screen, and I believe, oops, I'm gonna click that. I believe my text said "click me" on it. Oh, and I guess you got to click off or hit enter or something like that to actually change it. It gives it an ID here, which is kind of nice. So let's just call that bottom button. Oh. Oh. Okay, it's trying to refactor, but nothing's referencing that, so that's interesting. So we'll continue with bottom button. It's nice to know that if anything was communicating to it or referencing it, that it would refactor it for you. Whereas if you change it here to bottom button 2, now you got to go everywhere in your code and update it as well to look at bottom button 2. So that's convenient. But yeah, look at that. We have some basic views on the screen. If we go ahead and run this, we will see this is the old view that we had, and we're going to move on to a newer layout that we've designed here. As soon as that works, and boom, would you look at that? We now have a beautiful little layout. It's got that nice elevation. When you click on it, you can click it and nothing happens. But hey, we have a new layout here. When you take a look at it in code, this is really all that it is. So if that seems like a lot, I'm sorry. If it doesn't, and it seems efficient, then great. Happy to show you. I do kind of want to touch on some other things here. Whenever you add a view to the screen, these are the 2 mandatory fields that it requires, a layout width and a layout height. And so if you can see here, this bounding box is wrapped around it completely, basically as tight as it can, and that is because both the width and the height of this view are set to wrap content. If, let's say, we wanted this view to expand and cover the entire horizontal width of the screen, you would think you maybe do it, but can't do that because now it's going to actually, because it's constrained here and here, it ends up in the middle of the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete that. I just Command Z a few times. And instead, there are a few options here for, okay, so it's just wrap content and match parent. But if we do match parent now, that's going to take up as much room as it possibly can in the given parent. And because the parent is, in this case, the entire screen, it's going to go ahead and expand to be the entire screen. And let's just say that we wanted the text alignment to be in the center. Now our title is in the middle. And let's say that we wanted text all caps for some reason to be true. Now we have a little bit of a goofy looking UI, but why don't we go ahead and, well, so instead of doing that, let's add this one to here. And so now you can see when you look at it this way that both of these views are completely centered in the screen. Right? If we were to run it, it would look great, and it would be completely in the center of the screen, almost. There's a little margin that we need to add here. Margin in 16 dp. So now that pushes it away from the end as much as it pushes it away from the beginning. So now this is 100% lined up in the middle. I knew something looked a tiny bit off. And because we're setting the start and the end, the left or the right, or if you think about it, the horizontal to be the same, there's actually an attribute for that called margin horizontal. So if you want to make sure that your left and your right are, pushed equally away from whatever it's constrained to, you can go ahead and use the horizontal attribute. But otherwise, you can set, the start and end or left and right separately if for whatever reason you want it further from the left than you do from the right, etc. So otherwise, again, instead of end to end of parent, we're going to put the end to the end of our title text view. And so now that is going to, it's a pretty interesting thing there, but if you can see here, that's setting the start and the end to be centered around the the title text view, which, because that's centered, this will now be centered. So this is, I guess, another way to kind of group things and center things. But at first glance, you can very easily see that these elements here are centered in the screen, but then when you start to look at it, you can see that the title text view itself is significantly larger than the subtitle. You can just tell in the bounding box there that this is obviously a much more efficient and better way of laying out the layout, or the view, excuse me, whereas this one is maybe for a title it makes sense because you don't want things floating up in here and to be left and right of the text, but just kind of trying to show you the differences here between how the views are laid out by the system, even though to your eye right here they look like they're both centered in the screen. This will actually also impact the clickable region, which is the last thing I'll mention because I don't want this to get too long. But if you were to, for some reason, put a click listener on this view versus this view, if the user were to actually tap here, you would fire that click listener. Whereas if they were to tap here, they wouldn't be firing the click listener for the subtitle text view. They would actually have to click specifically on the text. So a couple accessibility notes in there to kind of think about as you build your UI and determine, oh, is this strictly just text that we're trying to show the users? Does this have another purpose? Can they click it? Can they click to expand it? Etc. You might want to make that click region easier so that someone with a thumb or a finger can get it no problem, instead of, they don't have the luxury of having pinpoint accuracy like we have here on an emulator with your mouse and whatnot. So I know we deviated from the design a tiny bit, but I'm pretty happy with it. I think this will give us some room to work with and expand. So thanks for tuning in. Hopefully this is not too overwhelming and you're starting to get an idea of some of the basic views here, the text views and buttons that we've put on the screen. And you know what? This doesn't look terrible for the first video. So thanks for tuning in, and drop by next time to watch this screen expand.